The sound was what woke me, but not in the way a sudden noise does. It wasn't a crash or a shout. It was a small, insistent wrongness, a rhythmic scraping of metal on metal, followed by a soft, frustrated grunt. I glanced at the clock on my nightstand. 6:42 a.m. The sun was just beginning to cast that thin, gray light that promises a cold day. I sat up, my old bones protesting the movement, and padded to the window that overlooks my back garden and the stretch of common woods beyond. And there she was. Carol Vance, president of the Fairweather Glades Homeowners Association, was standing not 10 feet inside my property line. She was wearing a pink tracksuit that seemed to vibrate with furious energy against the muted greens and browns of the autumn woods. In her hands, she held a pair of garden shears, and she was using them to try and pry my trail camera off the oak tree it was strapped to. The scraping was her trying to snip the heavy-duty nylon strap. The grunt was her failure to do so. I took a slow sip from the mug of water I keep by my bed. My heart rate hadn't changed. My breathing was even. Years of managing catastrophic data failures for a company whose name is synonymous with the internet had taught me that panic is a useless, secondary emotion. The first step is always observation. Assess the situation, gather data. She gave up on the shears and began to pull at the strap with her bare hands, her face screwed up in a mask of righteous indignation. She was a woman who had mistaken her own opinions for immutable laws of physics. She believed that if she wanted something to be true, her wanting it was force enough to make it so. Right now, she wanted that camera off my tree. The tree and the camera disagreed. I walked out of my bedroom, down the hall, and into the kitchen. I started the coffee maker. The familiar gurgle and hiss was a comforting counterpoint to the one-woman show of impotent rage happening just outside my window. I watched her as the coffee brewed. She was now trying to simply wrestle the entire unit, box and all, from the tree as if it were a stubborn fruit. I could see her muttering to herself. Her breath plumed in the cold air, little puffs of fury dissipating into the morning. Coffee brewed. I poured a cup, black. I added nothing. This was a morning for clarity. I opened the sliding glass door to my patio and stepped out. The sudden cold was sharp, a slap in the face. Carol didn't notice me at first. She was too engrossed in her battle with the inanimate object. The camera was a simple, camouflaged box, no bigger than a paperback book. It had been there for 3 years. It had photographed deer, raccoons, a rather portly fox, and on one memorable occasion, a bobcat. It had never, to my knowledge, photographed a middle-aged woman in a pink tracksuit attempting to rip it from its mooring. "Good morning, Carol," I said. My voice was calm, conversational. She jumped, spinning around. For a moment, a flicker of something, guilt, surprise, crossed her face. It was gone in an instant, replaced by the hardened concrete of her authority. She dropped her hands from the camera and planted them on her hips, a classic posture of manufactured dominance. "Arthur," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "I was just dealing with this violation." I took another sip of my coffee. I said nothing. Silence is a wonderful tool. People rush to fill it, and in their haste, they often reveal more than they intend. "You know the rules," she continued, striding towards me, closing the distance until she was standing on the edge of my patio. She was on my property, lecturing me about rules. The irony was so thick, I could have stirred it into my coffee. Article 7, Section 4, no unapproved structures on common property. "This isn't common property, Carol," I said, still calm. "This is my property. The line is another 20 feet that way." I gestured with my mug towards a small, almost invisible iron stake in the ground, half hidden by fallen leaves. She waved a dismissive hand. "Don't be pedantic, Arthur. Everyone uses this as a walkway. It's historic use. It's the community's area. And this," she jabbed a finger back at the camera, "is a massive invasion of privacy. People walk here. Children play here. You are recording them. It's illegal." "It's not legal," I said simply. And it's not pointed at the path, it's pointed at my garden to see what's been eating my prize-winning azaleas. This was a small lie. The azaleas were mediocre at best. The camera was for my own peace of mind, a quiet eye in the woods. I am the president of this HOA, she announced, as if this were a title that conferred the powers of a monarch. And I am telling you this camera is a violation of community standards and a personal privacy tort waiting to happen. I have had complaints, numerous complaints. I knew she hadn't. I knew the only person who had ever complained about the camera was Carol herself in a passive-aggressive aside at the last HOA quarterly meeting. You have a right to privacy in your home, not on a walking path behind someone else's house, she had declared to the room at large. As of this moment, she said, her voice rising, I am issuing you an official notice of violation. You will be fined $100 per day until this surveillance device is removed. And if it's not gone by noon today, I will have it removed myself, and you will be billed for the removal. She was standing on my lawn, having just attempted to damage my property, threatening me with fines for having that property on my own land. The sheer, unadulterated confidence of her delusion was almost breathtaking. It was like watching someone argue with a brick wall, convinced it was about to apologize and move. I took a final sip of my coffee. Carol, I said, my voice still level, still quiet. You are trespassing. You have attempted to damage my property. You have threatened me. Everything you have said and done in the last 5 minutes has been recorded. The camera, you see, has a microphone. Her face, which had been flushed with righteous fury, went pale. The confidence didn't vanish, but it faltered, like a flickering fluorescent bulb. Just so we're clear, I continued, setting my empty mug down on the patio table. The camera has a cellular connection. It doesn't store footage on a local card. It uploads it in real time to a secure, encrypted cloud server. So even if you had managed to rip it off the tree, you would have accomplished nothing but committing theft and destruction of property, all of which you would have documented for me yourself. I let that hang in the air between us. The cold, morning silence was broken only by the distant hum of the highway and the chirping of a lone, confused bird. She stared at me, her mouth slightly agape. The intricate narrative she had built in her head, where she was the hero enforcing the rules against a creepy old man, had just collided with the hard, documented reality of property law and modern technology. She had no idea. She had no idea who she was dealing with. She thought I was just a quiet widower who kept to himself. She thought I was an easy target. She had no idea that for the last 40 years of my life, my entire profession had been about one thing: creating, managing, and defending immutable records. She had just tried to bully a man who had spent his life building fortresses of data. And she had done it on camera. She had no idea she had just initiated a final project review, and that her entire, flimsy empire was the subject of the audit. But before I tell you what I did next, I should probably explain. This wasn't about a trail camera. It was never about a trail camera. The camera was merely the catalyst, the final foolish overstep that moved the conflict from a cold war of attrition into a direct engagement. To understand what happened, you have to understand the ground truth, the foundational data, and you have to understand me. My name is Arthur Pendleton. I am 68 years old. For 42 years, I was a senior project manager and systems architect for a company that, for legal reasons, I will call Omnidata. If you have used the internet today, you have interacted with a system I helped design, build, or maintain. My job, in layman's terms, was to make sure that data, unimaginably vast quantities of it, went where it was supposed to go, stayed there, and could be proven to be authentic and unaltered at any point in the future. I dealt in chains of custody for information, in digital receipts, in multi-layered security protocols, in triple redundant, off-site backups. My entire world was built on a simple principle: you must be able to prove what you know. A fact without documentation was merely an opinion. My wife Eleanor passed away 5 years ago. She was the project manager of our lives. I handled the data. She handled the people. She was warm, vibrant, and could diffuse a tense situation with a smile and a plate of her famous lemon bars. Without her, our big house in the city felt like an empty server farm, all humming machinery and no soul, so I sold it. I bought this house, a smaller, quieter place, on the edge of a newish development called Fairweather Glades, because it bordered 100 acres of protected woodland. Eleanor would have loved the view. She would have loved the quiet. I came here for peace. I am not by nature a confrontational man. I prefer observation to participation. I want my systems to run smoothly, my inputs and outputs to be predictable, my life, my property, my neighborhood. I see them all as interconnected systems. For the first year, it was exactly the haven I'd hoped for. I gardened. I read. I took long walks in the woods. My neighbors were polite but distant, which suited me fine. I was the quiet widower in the house at the end of the cul-de-sac. And then Carol Vance was elected president of the HOA. She had lived here for years, but her ascension to the presidency was like a software bug that suddenly gains administrative privileges. It started small, a flurry of notices about the precise shade of beige that was acceptable for mailbox posts, a memo on the approved species of seasonal flowers for front yard planters, complete with a list of non-compliant weed species that included perfectly harmless marigolds. I remember reading that memo and thinking it was an inefficient use of resources, but I complied. I bought the approved petunias. It was easier, it kept the system running. But the system was becoming unstable. Carol's leadership wasn't about maintaining property values or ensuring community standards. It was about power. It was about creating a world that conformed to her exact specifications. She, and the board she had stacked with her acolytes, began to wield the HOA's book of covenants, conditions, and restrictions, the CC and Rs, not as a guiding document, but as a weapon. Fines were levied for trash cans, left out 10 minutes past the designated time. A family was threatened with a lien for a small, tasteful treehouse their son had built with his grandfather. A retired couple was cited for unapproved lawn ornamentation because of a pink flamingo they'd had for 20 years. Each act of enforcement was performed with a theatrical, public flourish. Carol didn't just send a notice. She would show up on your doorstep, flanked by another board member, and deliver a lecture. She thrived on the confrontation. She fed on the unease of her neighbors. I watched it all. And I did what I have always done when faced with a chaotic system. I started a file. It wasn't a physical folder, of course. That's amateur hour. On a triple encrypted solid-state drive, locked in my fireproof safe, I created a directory. I named it, simply, Project_Carol. Inside, I created subdirectories: correspondence, observed_infractions, financials, bylaws, _and_ precedents, personnel. When I received my first and only violation notice for the improper storage of a gardening hose, I paid the $25 fine immediately. I did not argue. I did not complain. I scanned the notice, the check, and the cleared check image from my bank. I saved them as v-001_hose.pdf in a new subfolder. I kept the receipts. This is a core principle. In any dispute, the person with the better records wins. I started documenting her actions against others. When David, my neighbor 2 doors down, told me in a hushed, terrified whisper about the $300 fine he'd received for his son's basketball hoop being the wrong color, I made a note of the date, the time, and the specifics. I took a time-stamped photo of the basketball hoop from my own property. I created a new file, neighbor_testimony_d_miller.txt. Over the next 2 years, the file grew. I subscribed to the county's public records portal and set up alerts for any filings related to the Fairweather Glades HOA, liens, small claims court cases, permit applications. They all went into the file. I attended the quarterly HOA meetings, sitting in the back, silent. I recorded the audio of every meeting on my phone. Not secretly, I would place my phone on the table in front of me, next to a notepad. If asked, I would have said I was recording it to help with my minutes. No one ever asked. They saw a quiet old man taking notes. They had no idea I was compiling a complete, time-stamped, audio-verifiable record of every motion, every vote, every passive-aggressive pronouncement Carol made. Those audio files went into the folder, named by date. Meeting_2022-Q1.mp3. My trail camera was part of this system. I installed it 3 years ago, long before Carol's reign of terror began in earnest. But when she started making pronouncements about the common area behind my house, I upgraded it. I bought a model with a high-definition sensor, a microphone, and its own cellular data plan. It wasn't for spying. It was a silent, impartial, 24/7 witness placed on my own property, watching my own property line. It was a data collection node, a perimeter sensor. Carol saw a camera. She saw a violation of her perceived authority. I saw a log file. I saw an unimpeachable source of ground truth data. Her fundamental mistake, the one that morning on my lawn, was in misunderstanding the nature of the object she was trying to destroy. She thought she was silencing a witness. In reality, she was just creating the most critical data point of all, a record of her own criminal malfeasance. She had taken a system I had built for passive observation and turned it into an active evidence-gathering machine, with herself as the star. Her face was a frozen mask of disbelief. The pink tracksuit, which had seemed so loud and aggressive moments before, now just looked pathetic. She stood there, on the edge of my lawn, processing the information that her entire performance had been not only witnessed, but archived. "You can't," she stammered, the first crack in her armor. "You can't record me. It's illegal." "In our state, Carol," I said, my voice as patient as if I were explaining a technical specification to a new intern. "It is legal to record audio as long as one party consents. I consent. It is also legal to film anything on your own property. You are on my property. Ergo, everything that has transpired here is perfectly, legally documented." I picked up my empty coffee mug. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have things to do. I would advise you to leave my property immediately." She stared at me for another long second, her mind clearly racing, trying to find an angle, a foothold for her authority. She found none. She turned, wordlessly, and marched back across my lawn, through the thin patch of trees, and onto the common path. She did not look back. I stepped back inside my house and locked the sliding door. I walked to my study, sat down at my desk, and woke up my computer. The first thing I did was log into the cloud service for the trail camera. There it was. A new file, labeled motion_detected_2023-10-26-06-41-AM. I clicked play. The quality was excellent. The audio was crisp, her scraping, her grunts, our entire conversation. It was all there. I downloaded the file, renamed it exhibit_Vance_trespass_and_threats.mp4, and moved it into a new subdirectory within project_Carol. This one I labeled active_incident_10-26. I made 2 encrypted backups, one to a separate physical drive, and one to my personal, private cloud storage, a service completely different from the cameras. Redundancy is key. My hands did not shake. My pulse was steady. This was not a moment of anger or panic. It was a moment of transition. The project had moved from passive data collection to active resolution. It was, in a strange way, calming. I was back in my element. There was a problem, and I had the data to solve it. It was time to get to work. The first step in any formal process is to establish a clear, documented attempt at de-escalation. You must be able to show that you provided the opposing party with a reasonable opportunity to correct their behavior. I spent the next hour composing a letter. It was not a letter of anger, it was a letter of facts. It began, "Dear Ms. Vance, This letter is to formally memorialize the events of this morning, October 26th, at approximately 6:42 a.m. I detailed her presence on my property, citing the specific parcel number from my deed. I described her attempt to remove my personal property, the trail camera, model number, serial number. I transcribed, verbatim, her threats to fine me and have the property removed. I then cited the relevant sections of the state law regarding trespass and attempted property damage. I also included a clear, high-resolution satellite image of my property, with the lot lines marked in red, showing the tree in question was a full 22 feet inside my boundary. The letter concluded not with a threat, but with a simple, clear statement of required action. This letter serves as a formal notice that you are not to enter my property again. Any further attempts to do so will be reported to the Sheriff's Department. Furthermore, any attempt by you or the Fairweather Glades HOA to levy fines, place a lien, or otherwise penalize me for the legal placement of personal property on my own land will be met with immediate legal action, for which I will seek full reimbursement of all associated costs. This matter can be considered closed if all threats of fines are rescinded in writing, and you cease and desist from any further harassment. I printed 2 copies. I put one in an envelope and addressed it to Carol Vance at her home address. The other I placed in an envelope addressed to the Fairweather Glades HOA Board of Directors, in care of their official mailing address, which was a P.O. box. I drove to the post office. I sent both letters via certified mail, with return receipt requested. The little green cards, which would come back to me with their signatures, would be my proof that they had received the warning. It cost me $16.48. I kept the receipt. I scanned it when I got home and filed it under active_incident_10-26/correspondence. Carol's response was exactly what I predicted. Silence. The green return receipt from her personal letter came back to me 3 days later, signed in her flamboyant, angry scrawl. The one to the HOA board came back a day after that, signed by the board's secretary, a nervous-looking woman named Margaret. They had been warned. They had been given an off-ramp. They chose to ignore it. This is a critical phase in any conflict resolution. The dismissal of a formal, reasonable warning is not a sign of your failure. It is a gift. It demonstrates the other party's bad faith. It proves they are not interested in a reasonable solution. It becomes a cornerstone of your case. With the warning sent and verifiably received, I moved to the next phase, professional consultation. I didn't need a lawyer yet. Calling a lawyer is like launching a missile. It's a powerful tool, but you don't use it for reconnaissance. First, you need to be sure of your intelligence. I called Frank. Frank and I had worked together for 30 years. He was our department's data security specialist, a man so paranoid he made me look like a reckless optimist. He now ran his own digital forensics consultancy from his home in Arizona. "Arthur," he boomed over the phone, "to what do I owe the pleasure? Did you finally forget your password and lock yourself out of your own life?" "Frank," I said, "I have a small project, a personal matter. I need a second set of eyes on some data and a consult on evidence integrity." I spent the next hour laying out the entire situation, from the history of Project_Carol to the incident with the camera. I didn't use emotional language. I gave him facts, dates, and file names. He was silent for most of it, a sure sign he was taking it seriously. "So," he said when I finished, "this HOA president, this Carol, she tried to steal a cellular camera while it was recording her, and then threatened you on tape after you told her it was recording." "That is an accurate summary," I said. Frank let out a long, slow whistle. "Artie, my friend, this isn't a project. This is a gift. It's a self-documenting implosion. What do you need from me?" "I want to make sure my chain of custody is perfect," I said. "I'm sending you an encrypted drive with the key files. I want you to act as a third-party validator. I want a notarized affidavit from you stating that you received the files on this date, that you verified their metadata, the creation dates, the timestamps, the GPS data embedded from the camera, and that they appear untampered with." Easy, he said. That's just process. What else? I want you to do a deep dive on her, I said. Carol Vance. And the other board members. Public records, social media, anything that's discoverable through legal means. I have a feeling this isn't her first rodeo. People with this specific brand of aggressive incompetence usually leave a trail. Now you're talking my language, Frank said, a note of genuine excitement in his voice. It's like digital archaeology. I'll get started right away. One more thing, Artie. This camera of yours, what's the battery life? With the external pack I have rigged up, about 3 weeks, I said. Good. Don't touch it. Don't go near it. Let her make the next move. Just let the witness keep witnessing. We hung up, and I felt a sense of profound calm. The machine was in motion. I had initiated the process. Now I just had to follow it. The next week was quiet. Too quiet. I saw Carol getting her mail from a distance. She didn't look in my direction. There were no more violation notices on my door. I almost allowed myself to think that my letter had worked, that she had decided to back down. But I knew better. People like Carol don't back down. They regroup. They escalate. The escalation came, as I knew it would. Not with a whisper, but with a siren. It was a Tuesday afternoon, just after 3. I was in my study, reviewing the preliminary report Frank had sent me, a fascinating document that confirmed Carol Vance had been the treasurer of an HOA in a different county 5 years prior. An HOA that had faced a lawsuit from its members for financial mismanagement just after she'd moved away. It was circumstantial, but it was a pattern. I was adding it to the file when I heard the unmistakable sound of a vehicle driving slowly up our quiet cul-de-sac. I looked out the window and saw the county sheriff's department SUV. It parked directly in front of my house. A deputy stepped out. He was young, looked competent, and had the weary, patient air of someone who spends his days dealing with other people's nonsense. And then I saw who had summoned him. Carol Vance, in a different, more business-like navy blue tracksuit, was marching towards him from her house 2 doors down, clutching a sheaf of papers. I did not panic. I did not rush outside. I stood up, walked to my front hall closet, and retrieved a slim, leather-bound portfolio. Inside it, I had placed 3 documents. A certified copy of the deed to my house, which included the legal description of the property. A printout of the official county plat map, which clearly showed the property lines for the entire cul-de-sac. And my driver's license. I put on a jacket, walked out my front door, and closed it gently behind me. By the time I reached the end of my driveway, Carol was in full performance mode. And he's been recording everyone, officer, she was saying, her voice pitched to a level of strained, theatrical desperation. We have children in this neighborhood. He has this spy camera pointed right where they play. I've asked him. The HOA has officially notified him, and he refuses to take it down. He's a recluse. We don't know what he's doing in there, and frankly, we're all scared. The deputy was listening, his face impassive. He held a notepad, but he wasn't writing anything down. He was observing. He turned his head as I approached. Sir, are you the owner of this residence? He asked. I am, I said calmly. Arthur Pendleton. Carol jumped in immediately. He admits it. Officer, he's the one. You need to make him take that camera down. It's harassment. The deputy held up a hand, a small, quiet gesture that nevertheless silenced her instantly. Ma'am, let me talk to him, please. He turned his full attention to me. His eyes were neutral, but they were taking in everything. My calm demeanor, my professional-looking portfolio, the way I stood patiently without interrupting. Sir, I've received a complaint about a camera on your property. Yes, I said. I believe I know the camera in question. I did not get defensive. I did not get angry. I stated a fact. The complainant, Miss Vance here, states that it's pointed at a common area and recording people, including children, without their consent. May I? I asked, gesturing with the portfolio. He nodded. I opened the portfolio. I did not show him my file on Carol. I did not show him the video of her on my lawn. I did not tell him about my 40-year career in data management. I handed him the plat map. "Officer," I said, "as you can see from the official county plat map, the area in question is not common ground. It is my private property. The tree on which the camera is mounted is located approximately 22 feet inside my property line, which is marked by a survey stake." He took the map and looked at it. His eyes were sharp. He traced the lines with his finger. He looked from the map to my house, then to the woods behind it. He was building a mental model of the physical space based on the official documentation. "The camera," I continued, "is pointed east, directly at my back garden. Its primary field of view does not include the walking path, which runs north-south. While it is possible that someone walking on the path might be captured at the very edge of the frame, the camera is on my property, pointed at my property. Under state law, that is entirely legal." Carol, unable to contain herself, burst out, "But it's a privacy violation. The HOA rules." "Ma'am," the deputy said, his voice a little firmer this time, "HOA rules are a civil matter. They are not criminally enforceable. I'm here to determine if a law has been broken." He turned back to me. "And the camera, you say it's pointed at your garden?" "Yes, officer," I said. "I can show you the live feed on my phone right now if you'd like. You'll see a lovely view of my struggling azaleas and a bird feeder." He suppressed a small smile. "That won't be necessary, Mr. Pendleton. Your documentation seems to be in order." He handed me back the plat map. This was the crucial moment. I had been vindicated, but I needed to lock it in. I needed to create another piece of official, third-party documentation. "Officer," I said, my voice still calm and respectful, "I appreciate you taking the time to look into this. For the record, I would like to state that this is not the first time Miss Vance has approached me about this camera. On the morning of October 26th, she came onto my property, attempted to remove the camera herself, and threatened me with fines. I have her on video doing so. I sent her and the HOA board a certified letter asking her to cease and desist. This call to you today feels like a continuation of that harassment. I do not wish to press charges at this time, but I would like my statement of these facts to be included in your official report of this incident." Would that be possible? The deputy's entire demeanor shifted. The professional neutrality sharpened into a look of genuine interest. He finally took out his pen and began to write. "She was on your property, you say?" "Yes, officer, I have the time-stamped video." He looked from me, with my quiet portfolio of facts, to Carol, whose face had gone from red with anger to white with shock. She had called him here to be her cudgel, to bully me into submission. Instead, he was now taking a formal statement from me about her. The tool had turned in her hand. "And you have a certified mail receipt showing you warned her?" he asked, his pen moving quickly. "I do," I said. He clicked his pen. "Mr. Pendleton, thank you for your cooperation. I believe I have everything I need." He then turned to Carol. His voice was flat, official, and stripped of any warmth. "Ms. Vance, this is a civil dispute. Do not call 911 for civil disputes unless there is an active threat of violence. Wasting the resources of the sheriff's department is a serious matter. Based on the documentation Mr. Pendleton has provided, he is well within his rights. I would strongly advise you and the HOA to handle this through the proper civil channels. Do you understand?" But the privacy," she stammered, her entire narrative collapsing around her. "Ma'am," he said with an air of finality. "Do you understand?" "Yes," she whispered. He gave her a long, hard look, then turned and walked back to his SUV. He gave me a brief, almost imperceptible nod as he got in. I had remained calm. I had provided facts. I had respected his authority and his process. She had been emotional, accusatory, and had brought opinions to a gunfight of facts. He had recognized the difference. I slid my documents back into the portfolio. I turned and walked back into my house, not looking at Carol. I didn't need to. I could feel the heat of her glare on my back. But it was no longer the glare of a predator. It was the glare of someone who had just realized they had picked a fight with the wrong person. and had done so in front of a witness with a badge. I closed my front door, went to my study, and wrote a detailed summary of the entire encounter, saving it as sheriff _incident _report _personal _log.txt. The official report, which I would request a copy of in a few days, would be even better. It would be another piece of granite for the foundation of my case. The visit from the sheriff's deputy was a turning point. It was a public event. Carol had intended for it to be a public shaming of me. Instead, it became a public validation of my position. And in a small community, news of that kind of reversal travels fast. The system, which had been tilted in her favor by fear and apathy, was beginning to correct itself. 2 days later, there was a tentative knock on my front door. It was David Miller, my neighbor from 2 doors down. The one with the basketball hoop. He was a young father, an accountant at a small local firm, and a man who was clearly uncomfortable with any form of conflict. He stood on my porch, clutching a manila envelope as if it were a life raft. "Mr. Pendleton?" he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I heard what happened. With the sheriff. I saw it from my window." "Arthur, please," I said, opening the door wider. "Would you like to come in?" He practically scurried inside, as if afraid of being seen. He sat on the edge of my armchair, the envelope resting on his knees. "I just wanted to say, thank you," he said. "No one has ever stood up to her like that. Not in a way that worked, anyway." "I merely presented the facts, David," I said, pouring him a glass of water. "Yeah, well," he said with a wry, nervous smile. "Facts don't seem to matter much at the board meetings." He looked down at the envelope. "Which is why I'm here. I think I have some facts that might help you." He opened the envelope and slid out a thin stack of papers. "I was on the finance committee for a year," he explained. "I volunteered because I'm an accountant. I thought I could help. It was a nightmare. Carol runs everything. The treasurer, Margaret, she's terrified of her. They hold these executive sessions before the real board meetings. No minutes are taken. That's where they decide everything. The official meetings are just for show." My ears perked up. Undocumented meetings where binding decisions are made are a massive violation of most HOA bylaws, which require transparency. "I quit the committee last month," David continued, his hands trembling slightly. "But before I did, I made copies of some things. This," he said, pushing a document across the coffee table, "is the invoice for the new Welcome to Fairweather Glades sign. The board approved a budget of $5,000. The final invoice was for $8,000. The extra $3,000 was for design and project management consultation." "And who was the consultant?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "A company called Vance Creative Solutions," David said, his voice thick with disgust. "It's a sole proprietorship, her sole proprietorship. She paid herself $3,000 of HOA money to manage a project that was already being handled by the sign company." I picked up the invoice. It was a bombshell, not a loud one, but a deep, foundational one. This wasn't just about petty tyranny anymore. This was about financial malfeasance. This was fraud. "There's more," he said, his confidence growing as he saw the serious, focused look on my face. "These are emails from her to the board, discussing how to structure fines to make them stick, and how to use liens as an intimidation tactic." She literally uses that word, intimidation. He had brought me the missing piece of the puzzle. I had been documenting her external actions. He had brought me proof of her internal motivations and methods. This was the kind of evidence that could get a board recalled. This was the kind of evidence that could lead to civil and even criminal penalties. "David," I said, my voice quiet but firm, "this is invaluable, but are you prepared for what happens when we use it? She will know it came from you." He took a deep breath. "My wife and I have talked about it. We were going to move. We love this house, but we can't live like this, worrying that our kid is going to leave his bike on the lawn and it's going to cost us $500. But then we saw you. We saw the sheriff's car, and we saw you walk back into your house, calm as can be. And we realized, You don't have to run from a bully, you just have to be better prepared than they are. Yes, he said, his voice gaining strength. I'm prepared. I took the documents. I walked to my study, and with David watching, I scanned each page into a new subfolder in project_Carol, which I labeled whistleblower_evidence_DM. I then placed the original documents in a new physical evidence folder. Chain of custody, I explained to him. We have to be able to prove where this came from, and that it hasn't been altered. He nodded, a look of understanding and relief on his face. He was an accountant. He understood the power of a clean audit trail. The coalition was forming. First, it was just me. Then, it was me and my professional contact, Frank. Now, it was me and a fearful neighbor who had found his courage. The system was continuing its correction. The day after David's visit, I received an anonymous email. It was from a generic, untraceable address. The message was short. Margaret is done. She'll vote with you if it comes to it. The budget meeting is next week. Carol is planning to push through a special assessment for legal and security enforcement. Check the bylaws, Article 12, Section 2. She can't do it without a 2/3 vote of the membership, not just the board. Margaret, the board secretary. The disillusioned insider. She had reached her breaking point. I now had a potential ally on the inside. The board was no longer a monolith. I pulled up the HOA bylaws, a 200-page PDF I had, of course, saved in my bylaws, _ precedence folder. I went to Article 12, Section 2. The anonymous emailer was correct. A special assessment required a full vote of the membership at a special meeting, with 30 days' notice. Carol was planning to bypass the entire community to fund her war against me. It was all coming together. The narrative was clear, the evidence was mounting, and the allies were appearing. All that was needed was for Carol to make one last, public, undeniable mistake. I knew she wouldn't disappoint me. 3 days later, a letter arrived in every mailbox in Fairweather Glades. It was on official HOA letterhead. It was a special community bulletin. It announced in bold letters that a resident, whom it did not name, but described as living at the end of my cul-de-sac, had created a serious security and privacy risk with an unauthorized surveillance installation. It stated that the board was taking all necessary steps to mitigate the risk, and that due to the ongoing legal and enforcement costs associated with this single resident, a special emergency assessment of $200 per household would be levied, effective immediately, to shore up the HOA's legal fund. And at the bottom of the public letter, almost as a postscript, was a personal note for me. It was a formal notice of fine, not for $100, not for $1,000. It was a fine for $10,000 for ongoing, willful violation of community bylaws, creation of a hostile environment, and refusal to comply with board directives. It further stated that a lien was being placed on my property for the amount of the fine. It was a masterpiece of overreach. It was libelous, legally baseless, and a violation of the HOA's own governing documents. It was a declaration of total war. It was also the most beautiful, perfect, self-incriminating document she could have possibly created. I scanned it, I filed it, and I called my lawyer. I believe it's time we scheduled a launch, I said. The HOA annual general meeting was held in the clubhouse, a sterile beige room that usually hosted children's birthday parties and lackluster potlucks. Tonight, it was a courtroom. The air was thick with tension. Every single one of the 150 chairs was filled. A record turnout. On one side of the aisle sat Carol's supporters, a collection of her board cronies, and a few residents who genuinely believed her narrative of order and security. On the other side sat everyone else. The families tired of being fined for their kids' toys, the old-timers who resented being told what flowers to plant, the quiet majority who had been cowed into silence and were now here to see what would happen. David Miller and his wife sat in the front row of this section, giving me a nervous but determined nod. I was not sitting with them. I was at a separate table at the front, to the side of the main dais where the board sat. With me was Mr. Davies, the lawyer I had engaged. He was young, sharp, and looked like he was born wearing a perfectly tailored suit. He had spent the last week poring over Project_Carol with the glee of a scholar discovering a lost manuscript. In front of him was a single, slim briefcase. The meeting began with Carol's performance. Carol's. It was the culmination of her entire career as a performative tyrant. She stood at the podium, her voice trembling with what she clearly intended to be perceived as righteous emotion. She spoke of community, of safety, of the sanctity of their peaceful neighborhood. She painted a picture of a dark, intrusive force that had come to threaten it all. She spoke of a rogue resident who flouted the rules, who spied on children, who had met their every reasonable request with hostility and legal threats. "He has tried to intimidate us," she said, her voice cracking, a single, perfect tear tracing a path down her cheek. "He has tried to bully your board, the very people you elected to protect your property values and your way of life. We have been forced to spend our community's money to defend ourselves against his aggression. The fine we levied was a last resort, the special assessment. It pains me to ask this of you, but it is necessary to protect the community from this lawsuit-happy interloper." It was a compelling story. In a world without facts, it might have even worked. She sat down to a smattering of applause from her side of the room. A wave of murmurs and uncertain glances passed through the rest of the crowd. The board secretary, Margaret, then stood up to read the agenda. When she got to new business, she paused. "The board recognizes Mr. Arthur Pendleton's legal counsel, Mr. Davies, who has requested 5 minutes to address the membership." Carol shot Margaret a look of pure venom. But it was too late. It was on the agenda. It was official. Mr. Davies walked to the podium. He was the picture of calm professionalism. He did not raise his voice. He did not use emotional language. He opened his briefcase and took out a small, remote control for the projector that was aimed at the large white screen behind the board. "Good evening," he said. "My name is Simon Davies. I represent Mr. Arthur Pendleton. We are here tonight to correct some factual inaccuracies. We will not take 5 minutes. We will likely take less." Click. The first slide appeared on the screen. It was the high-resolution satellite image of my property. The lines marked in red, a bright yellow circle around the oak tree. "This is Mr. Pendleton's property," Davies said. "As you can see from the official county plat map, the tree in question is well within his property line. It is not, and has never been, common area. The assertion that it is factually incorrect." Click. The next slide was a scanned image of my certified mail receipt, with Carol's signature clearly visible. "This is a receipt, signed by Miss Vance, acknowledging that on October 27th, she was formally notified that the camera was on private property and was asked to cease and desist her harassment of Mr. Pendleton. The assertion that he was unresponsive is factually incorrect." Click. The next slide was a screenshot of the state law regarding single-party consent for audio recordings. The assertion that Mr. Pendleton's recording was illegal is, again, factually incorrect. Click. A new slide. A summary from the sheriff's deputy's official report. The sheriff's department responded to a call from Ms. Vance. After reviewing the evidence, the deputy concluded that no laws were broken by Mr. Pendleton, and that the matter was a civil dispute. The assertion that my client is engaged in criminal behavior is not only incorrect, it is libelous. With each click, the foundation of Carol's narrative was being systematically dismantled. The murmuring in the room grew louder. People were looking at Carol, whose face was becoming a rigid, white mask. "And now," Davies said, his voice still perfectly even, "we come to the matter of the camera itself. Ms. Vance has repeatedly claimed that her only concern was privacy. She has claimed that her actions were about protecting the community. We have evidence to suggest otherwise." Click. The screen went black for a moment, and then a video began to play. It was the footage from the trail camera. The timestamp in the corner read, October 26th, 2023, 6:41 a.m. The room was silent as they watched Carol Vance, in her pink tracksuit, attempting to pry the camera off the tree. They heard the scrape of metal. They heard her frustrated grunts. They heard me say, "Good morning, Carol." They heard her entire tirade, her threats of fines, her false claims about the property line. They heard me explain that she was being recorded. A gasp went through the room. This was it, the public humiliation, the undeniable proof. But this was not the collapse. This was just the prelude. The video continued. It showed her face pale and shocked after I explained the camera's cellular connection. It showed her turning and marching away. And then, for 10 seconds, the video was just a peaceful shot of my back garden as the sun rose. People started to shift in their seats, thinking it was over. "Please continue watching," Davies said quietly. And then it happened. The camera view suddenly lurched violently. The image became a blurry mess of pink fabric and then darkness. But the audio was crystal clear. They could hear her heavy, angry breathing. They could hear the jingle of her keys. They heard her walk, the crunch of gravel under her feet. They heard her front door open and close. She had done it. After I left her on the lawn that morning, after she had been warned that she was on tape, she had gone back. She had gone back and stolen the camera. The room erupted. Shouts of "a thief" and "oh my God" filled the air. Carol had shrunk down in her chair, her face ashen. Her supporters were staring at her, their mouths open in shock. But Davies held up a hand. "Ladies and gentlemen, please," he said. "The most important part is yet to come." The room fell silent again, straining to listen to the audio coming from the dark screen. They heard muffled sounds, the opening of a door, and then voices. "Did you get it?" a man's voice asked. It was one of the other board members. "Yes," Carol's voice replied, sharp and triumphant. "It's right here, the little creep's spy machine." The camera, still recording audio and video to the cloud, was in her handbag, on a table. She had taken it directly to an impromptu, secret meeting with her board. She had brought the witness into the conspiracy. For the next 2 minutes, the entire community listened as Carol Vance and her 3 board allies planned their strategy. They listened as they discussed how to frame the fines. They heard her say the line David had told me about. "We need to use this to intimidate him, to make an example of him." They heard Margaret, the secretary, nervously ask if this was legal, and they heard Carol shout her down. They heard them conspire to levy the special assessment and lie about the reason. They heard them by name, one by one, agree to the plan. It was at that moment, listening to her own voice conspire to commit fraud and harassment, recorded by the very device she had stolen to cover her tracks, that Carol Vance finally collapsed. It wasn't a dramatic, theatrical faint. It was an implosion. The mask of the performative tyrant didn't just drop, it shattered. Her face went utterly blank. The muscles in her jaw went slack. Her eyes, which had been burning with fury and indignation, became dull, empty windows. She stared at the screen, but she wasn't seeing anything. She was seeing the end. She had spent years building a kingdom on a foundation of lies and intimidation, and a quiet old man with a filing system had just brought the whole thing down with a single, perfectly documented truth. The silence in the room was absolute. It was a heavy, profound silence, the kind that follows a massive, unexpected explosion. The audio from the speakers had stopped. The screen was black. But the voices of Carol and her co-conspirators still hung in the air, an indelible stain. All eyes were on the board members at the front table. The 3 men who had been party to the secret meeting looked like they had seen ghosts, their faces pale and slick with sweat. Margaret, the secretary who had been shouted down, was staring at her hands, a single tear rolling down her cheek. And Carol was gone. The person who had stood at the podium just minutes before, full of fire and righteous fury, had been replaced by a hollow shell. She was a statue of a defeated woman. Mr. Davies walked back to his table, his work done. He had not gloated. He had not embellished. He had simply presented the evidence. The documents had spoken for themselves. The first person to break the silence was David Miller. He stood up, his hands shaking, but his voice clear and strong. I move for an immediate vote of no confidence in President Vance and any board member heard conspiring on that recording to misuse HOA funds and defraud the community. Seconded, a woman shouted from the back. Chaos threatened to erupt, but a new voice cut through it. It was a retired judge who lived on the other side of the development, a man who rarely came to meetings. He stood up, his bearing still commanding. According to the bylaws, he announced to the room, a motion of no confidence from the floor requires a majority vote to proceed to a formal recall. All in favor of proceeding with the recall vote, say aye. The response was a deafening roar. Aye. It was a single unified voice of a community that had found its courage. All opposed, the judge asked. Silence. Not even Carol's staunchest allies dared to speak. The motion carries, the judge said calmly. The board is hereby instructed to schedule an immediate special election to recall and replace the named members. In the interim, their authority is suspended. I suggest an interim committee be formed to manage the transition. He looked directly at David Miller and then at Margaret. I nominate Mr. Miller and Ms. Peterson to lead it. It was over. The regime had fallen in less than 10 minutes. Carol Vance finally moved. She stood up, her movements jerky and robotic. She didn't look at the crowd. She didn't look at me. She walked, stiff-legged, out of the clubhouse and into the darkness. No one followed her. The aftermath was swift and comprehensive. The legal, financial, and social consequences cascaded down upon Carol and her enablers. My lawyer, Mr. Davies, filed a civil suit against Carol personally for the theft of the camera, for libel based on the community bulletin, and for the costs associated with his services. She never responded. He won a default judgment for the full amount, which included the cost of the camera, his fees, and punitive damages. Her wages were garnished. The HOA's own legal counsel, once they reviewed the evidence I provided, advised the new interim board to settle immediately. Every fine Carol had ever levied under the hostile environment or privacy violation pretense was declared null and void. The $10,000 fine and lien against my property were expunged from the record, and I received a formal written apology from the HOA. The $200 special assessment was, of course, canceled, and the funds already collected by some were immediately refunded. David Miller, heading the investigation by the new Finance Committee, discovered the extent of Carol's self-dealing. The Vance Creative Solutions invoice was just the beginning. There were payments to a landscaping company, owned by her brother-in-law, for consultation on projects that never happened. There were administrative fees that were just direct transfers to her personal account. The interim board, on the advice of their lawyers, turned the entire file over to the district attorney's office. Carol Vance, who had called the sheriff on me for having a camera on my own property, was now facing criminal investigation for embezzlement and fraud. Her house went up for sale 3 months later. A "for sale by owner" sign appeared one day and was gone the next, replaced by one from a bank. It seemed her financial mismanagement was not limited to the HOA. A young family bought the house. I heard they were very happy. The community began to heal. The tone of the HOA notices changed from threatening to informative. The new board, led by David, held open, transparent meetings. They started by rescinding half of the petty rules Carol had instituted. The color of your mailbox post was no longer a matter for board-level debate. The pink flamingo returned to the retired couple's lawn, and it became an ironic symbol of the new era. People started talking to each other again, not in hushed whispers about Carol, but in normal, friendly tones. I received a steady stream of visitors for a few weeks. Neighbors bringing by baked goods, bottles of wine. They didn't say much, just Thank you, they didn't need to. I understood. I had not set out to be a hero. I had simply wanted to be left alone. And the only way to achieve that was to restore the system to its proper balance. And me, I found my peace. The project_Carol file was closed. I sent a final, notarized copy of the entire directory to Frank, along with a very expensive bottle of scotch, with a note that said, "Project completed. All deliverables met." He sent back a simple email. "Flawless execution. I sit on my patio now, in the quiet of the late afternoon. The coffee in my mug is warm. The woods are peaceful. The new camera is up in the same oak tree. It's a better model, with a wider lens and higher resolution. It's not there because I'm afraid. It's there as a reminder. A reminder that peace and quiet are not passive states. They are structures that must be built and maintained. They require vigilance. They require good records. I never wanted to own a community. I just wanted to own my home. But I learned that one is inextricably linked to the other. You cannot have a sanctuary if the world outside its walls is corrupt and chaotic. Sometimes to protect your own small square of order, you have to bring order to the system around you. It's a messy, unpleasant business. It requires patience. It requires meticulous documentation. It requires you to keep the receipts. But as I look out at the trees, at the quiet path where children now ride their bikes without fear of a scolding, I think Eleanor would have approved. The project is complete. The system is stable. And the view is, finally, peaceful.